Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Anissa Avon and I want to welcome you to how to use your privilege and position to create an inclusive environment. A talk today with expert coach and trainer, Rosalie Chamberlain. Hello, Rosalie.
Hi.
This is part of our Leading in a Crisis virtual summit that we've been doing since the end of March, actionable business and HR strategies for navigating crisis and change. If you've missed some of our previous sessions, we've talked about everything from leadership to managing crises to crisis management to Black lives and all lives matter in the workplace to crucial conversations and all shades of crazy response time, how to function at work remotely, etc. in between. So don't hesitate to go back to our Leading in Crisis. You'll see the URL there on a screen and watch the replays. They're going to be up and available. So let's jump right in. I want to say thank you to our sponsors, without which our series would not be happening. We wouldn't be able to do this without the Whitmarsh Consulting Group. And David Whitmarsh is the CEO of the Whitmarsh Consulting Group. They are a group of uniquely talented and experienced individuals who simply excel at multi-channel marketing, specifically in the HR arena. So thank you, David, and your team. A little bit about me and TurnKey Coaching Solutions. We are a full-service enterprise learning and development program, coaching, training solution provider. We provide scalable solutions to organizations of all sizes. Specifically, we have rolled out more recently a refocus on our diversity and inclusivity, and specifically some anti-racism programs for our clients. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring, I'm so excited to bring Rosalie Chamberlain on is because if ever you will meet someone who has literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours teaching this material and training and supporting organizations in cultivating an anti-racist culture, it's Rosalie. She has the experience and the depth of knowledge that I'm so grateful that she's going to bring to us today. So a little bit about Rosalie. Rosalie is a consultant. She's a coach. She's a keynote speaker. She's an author. Her experience and expertise is in the area of leadership development, conscious leadership, as I said earlier, diversity and inclusion, strategy, implicit bias, multicultural competency, including team dynamics. And then I also want to tell you just a little bit about her background. She brings forth more than 37 years as a foundation in the legal industry and in her corporate experience. She is also a Cornell University ILR certified diversity professional advanced practitioner. She also holds a Cornell University Johnson Graduate School of Management certificate and in the psychology of leadership. So I could go on, but I'm going to stop and I'm going to say, Rosalie, what did I miss and what makes you the expert? What are we going to learn today?
Thank you, Anissa. That was very lovely. I appreciate it. What makes me the expert is looking at my own journey in this particular area, because you've read out my credentials. I am a lifelong learner. I work on this all the time. I eat, drink, and sleep it, but I look at my own stuff. And we can be the experts of our own lives. And we have to commit to what we're going to do. I have done, we can't do business as usual anymore. We cannot do business as usual. And it takes every single one. And you will hear me say, or anybody who knows me, will say inclusion is an individual responsibility. And it doesn't matter if you are leading an entire organization or a team. We're all leaders in some form, and we all have the opportunity to influence and really create change in this world, and especially in this particular arena need of looking at privilege, dismantling privilege, and supporting marginalized people.
This is so timely, and I appreciate what you're saying specifically about it's an individual responsibility. And I know that that's part of what you're going to share with us. It's one thing to have a corporate program where we are supporting our clients in the concepts around anti-bias, anti-racism, inclusion, diversity. It's a whole nother thing to model that behavior. And I know that you're going to share that with us. So before we begin, I just want to say, I want you guys to know that this session is going to be recorded. So if you missed something, you'll be able to get the replay. Rosalie also has a deck, and that will be uploaded to the portal, the Leading in a Crisis Summit portal. I also want you to know this can be interactive. So if you have questions, and Rosalie is going to ask you to share your thoughts in the chat as well. So find your chat box, make sure that we answer your questions as they come up for you. So take it away, Rosalie.
Thank you. Okay, so you can see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here as well. And like I said, it cannot be business as usual. I've done hundreds and hundreds of classes, and it took a long time to get leaders and organizations to want to talk about bias, let alone privilege, racism, sexism, and all of the subjects that we don't want to normally talk about. But the recent events have proven that diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to get out of our complacency and we have to look at it. And leaders have to go deeper. Individuals have to go deeper to understand how we have privilege, what our biases are, and how they influence those practices and procedures and policies and our behaviors, because we all have behaviors.
I have so many questions, and I'm going to wait until you get started.
Okay.
I'm already ready.
Okay, great. So what is privilege? I mean, the dictionary says it's the principle or condition of enjoying special rights or immunities. Okay, fine. But the thing to remember, it is socially constructed, and it is systemic when the default is one group has access and occupies power over others. That is really important to remember. And privilege is also when you think something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. When we cannot see what is happening to someone else and cannot see their reality, it's a privilege. And there is a myth of meritocracy in this country. The myth of meritocracy is whatever a person ends up with is the belief that they either wanted it, they earned it, or worked for it, or deserved it. Well, we know that not everybody gets the same opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit more about equality versus equity a little bit later. But the myth of meritocracy also does not acknowledge systems of oppression or privilege that have an impact on someone being, having arbitrarily more or less difficult life or opportunity. And we're going to do an exercise in just a minute that is based on Peggy McIntosh's Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which is an incredible piece. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It consists of 50 questions and is often done as a privilege walk. And I've done it in my classes as a privilege walk. I actually participated in a privilege walk that I'm going to tell you about after we do the exercise. Normally, and so what I'll do is I'm going to be reading out some sentences that highlight major identity markers. And so a major identity marker is your or others' perception of your race, gender, ethnicity, class, body type, religion, education. All of those things, your sexual orientation, fall into your major identity markers. So I'm going to read those out. And normally in a privilege walk, we would, you would be asked to step up or step back. So at the end of it, you will have the people who've had more privileges in their lives at the head of the line, and you'll have people who had fewer at the back. We cannot do this, and I've done this on a virtual before. So what I'm going to ask you to do is definitely, oops, I did not mean to do that. Whoops. I have to go back.
There we go.
Pardon me. If you want to, you can put it in the chat. Right now, I'm not seeing the chat. So
I'll monitor the chat for you.
I'll ask you to monitor it. But raise your hand if you have been followed in a store due to suspicion of shoplifting, were discouraged from an activity or employment because of body type, made yourself uncomfortable to make someone else comfortable, feared.
We're having people raise their hands for sure.
Yeah. There's some, they're very, very common. Feared bringing home a date due to his or her race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion. Received a compliment tied to your race or gender. Received, stopped by a police officer and feared for your life. Believed you were turned down for an opportunity, employment, or otherwise because of one of your major identity markers or multiple major identity markers. Studied the culture of your ancestors thoroughly studied the culture of your ancestors in elementary school. Frequently see someone like you portrayed in likable ways. Now, this is a very small sampling of the questioning. The questions in the knapsack article are incredible, and there are things like we're born in this country. There are many, 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 which we obviously cannot do right now. But I want to share about a privilege walk that I did at an Unlearning Racism boot camp I participated in Berkeley, California. And we did the privilege walk, but we were told to hold hands. And as we either moved forward or backward based on what the question was, whether or not it was a privilege or a lack of privilege, you noticed you were getting further and further away from the person you're holding hands with. And I was holding hands with a woman who's Asian American, and it was starting to stretch and harder to hold hands. Eventually, I let go, and I'm guessing, I don't know if she let go. I can't recall, because in that moment, I thought I was following directions. This shook me to my core because I realized there were no instructions that you had to let go of someone's hand. I could have tried to pull her along with me. That is what using your privilege effectively is about. And that has had a huge impact. And I'll share some other stories that are of my own journey, because I think when we realize how somebody else is struggling with these issues of privilege and racism, especially when we are living in the majority white culture, then it makes it a little bit easier for us to go down those roads that we're afraid to go down to.
Yeah.
Privilege is our issue.
So thank you guys for raising. We had so many people raise their hands.
Great.
Thank you guys for raising your hands and participating.
So privilege is our issue. It is not a Black issue, Latino, American Indian, Asian, LGBTQ, gender, religious, physical or mental ability, class, or an age issue. And it is not about feeling guilt or shame. When you are feeling guilt or shame in regard to looking at privilege, it is a useless emotion and it will only halt the work. And it is our issue to see and understand and address. And as far as white privilege, it is extremely important because that's where the power structures exist.
So Rosalie, is this a good spot? I have a question about this. And if you're going to answer this later, please, I know you have a lot to cover, so maneuver me around. In conversations, as I am moving my own education, hopefully to the next level, and in working with clients, what I have discovered is that the word privilege, and specifically the word white privilege, in some cases, has an automatic, I shouldn't feel guilty. Why are you trying to make me feel guilty? I didn't invent this. I didn't make this happen. Why is this racism now pointed at me? what are organizations, two questions, what are individuals supposed to do about their own emotions around that?
Mm-hmm.
And what are organizations doing or need to do to address what you just said? There's nothing to feel guilty about. It's an awareness, though.
Exactly. And I'll say a little bit more about that to give everybody their opportunity to see what their own resistance is. But this is about resistance. It is a hot button word. It really is. And I've often used the word position instead of privilege. And given all that has been happening and where we are now, as I said, business is not business as usual. We cannot keep skirting around it. But if in your working with someone, you table the word privilege, talk about position. Where's your position to be able, because especially in the context of how are we helping others, to help educate, to, even if you're not a leader, we have the privilege of understanding more about racism and privilege. Where can I use that position and that influence to help educate others? So it's not, that's another piece of this individual responsibility piece. You can only take somebody as far as they're willing to go. And I recall having a conversation with a senior leader one time, and he hated the word privilege. And I didn't dare say white privilege, even though that was the elephant in the room. We knew that, but it was like, okay. And I said, let's quit saying privilege and let's say position. Where in your senior leadership position are you able to influence and raise other people up and help? And what is happening in the policies, the procedures, and the behaviors, yours and others, that need to be addressed because we're in an automatic mode that plays some, there's not a negative intent, and it's, so the whole idea of privilege and power is a hot button. It is, but it's not about making somebody feel guilty or shame. I'll share a little bit more about a story of my own, and it's also about it's definitely not to make someone feel bad. And I'm going to say a little bit more about some of the fears that come up around that later on in the program, and hopefully that will, but we can revisit questions, suggestions.
Right.
So there is a hierarchy of privilege, and this is kind of how it's the worldview. It's how people show up. So this is where intersectionality happens as well, and it's one of those things where it's how you view others and how others view you, and it's how we judge. We immediately, unconsciously, are judging people. If you had a judgment journal, and you noted every judgment you made about somebody else, and I'm not talking about an honest discernment for safety or things like that. I'm talking about judging how someone is going to be, who they are, stereotyping, grouping them, categorizing. If you made a note every time you did it, how fast would you fill up that judgment journal?
Unfortunately, way too fast.
And if it was judgments about yourself. So I'll share a quick little story, because we have these unconscious assumptions and biases all the time. I was about to have major back surgery. They were prepping me to go into the OR room, and my surgeon came in and said, it was just a couple of years ago, and he came in and he said, my partner's going to be assisting me. You haven't met my partner, but you'll have a chance to before we go in. And I said, great, And in walked Dr. Evelyn Berger. And I chuckled inside, because I do this work all the time. I expected his partner to be a man. There's nothing bad about me. And there was no need to feel badly about it. So we have to give, I often tell people, be curious. Be curious when you have a judgment or a bias, or you recognize a racist comment or a sexist comment or homophobic or xenophobic or ableism comment. just be curious. Where did I learn that?
Hmm.
Is that true? Am I putting everybody in that category? Did I have one bad experience and now I think they'll all be bad? So there are lots of little tips that we can do when we're examining our stories. And when you switch it to curiosity instead of judgment, because the judgment often when we're looking at our own selves, we go into deep judgment about ourselves, and that stops the work.
It does.
So I'll tell you another story. I grew up in Atlanta in the 50s and 60s, and I lived there most of my life. And this particular picture was on Facebook, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was Rich's department store, which is now a Macy's. And this particular building was not even there. But every Christmas, we would go downtown and you would go up to the top of Rich's, see the giant tree. We would go see Santa, and then we'd go out to dinner afterwards. And these are wonderful memories. When I saw this picture about 4 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, how fun that was to go into Santa's secret shop and shop for my parents, and my parents couldn't go in. So the elves would help the children shop. Parents couldn't go in, and we felt so big and proud of ourselves. What I didn't realize then was not only were parents not welcome, Black people were not welcome. And I was totally shielded from that reality and understanding the injustice of it all. Did this ruin my memory? No, it did not ruin my memory. I have memories. They're bittersweet now that I realize, but it didn't. What it does is it helps me realize, okay, we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. So as you start examining your stories and looking at how you were brought up or what you believed all this long, and you're willing to explore and challenge those, don't beat yourself up. Be curious, question, and look and say, okay, what is it I really want to do? Because I believe at the core, we all want to do the right thing, and we're compassionate, and our values would show that. So everything we do, we can look at and say, does this align with my values?
Yeah.
Another example, and another funny thing about that was, as I was getting this slide deck together, I thought about, and what about the privilege of the major holiday is around Christianity, and if your religion is not Christianity, and how even businesses are closed. And so you start to look at, see how are other people impacted by what we take for granted. This is another example. It was about 2 or 3 years ago. I was watching one of the morning shows, and the anchors were talking about Crayola crayons was going to retire another crayon. And they were all guessing, what color is it going to be? What are they going to retire? And this color was held up. This is actually apricot. But one of the anchors said, flesh. And I thought, how interesting. Here we are on national TV, and we're saying this without any awareness that this is the reality of flesh.
Yeah.
So we often take for granted Band-Aids. That's another one. If you start looking at media images, how are people portrayed? Are they portrayed likable? Are they portrayed unlikable? Or you start listening to wording. If you commit to start seeing this, you cannot not see it. You will. And they're aha moments. And aha moments are meant to, yes. But first we have to want to. It's about self-awareness, and it's about commitment. And if we approach it from that place, when you have an aha moment, you can have regret, you can have remorse, but it doesn't stop you in your tracks.
Yeah.
It helps you know, okay, so what can I do? And I think that's what we're experiencing more and more since the recent events that have been happening.
Are you finding, one of the programs that we're beginning to offer are simply discussion circles, facilitated safe places to have real conversations around this topic. And inevitably, what will come up is, I wasn't racist when I said flesh to the color of that crayon.
Right.
Right? Or whatever it is. And that's a perspective, right? That'll come
Right.
out in these discussions. How would a facilitator, someone in HR, someone like yourself, a trainer that's experienced in this, move from, we're not calling everyone a racist because what comes out of their mouth is clueless or non-inclusive, but there is an evolution that you're suggesting we need to go to. How are you facilitating that inside organizations when there's not a lot of time to have those kind of meaningful dialogues where you can move the awareness?
Right. That's a really good question. And the thing is, when we are talking about racism and we're talking about systems of power, and other people may see this differently, but what I think of when I talk about, if I were faced with that question in a discussion circle, and of course we are not trying to label people as racist, I would ask the question and say, okay, if we go back to the other crayon and say, this is flesh, and I'm the head of Crayola Crayons, and this is our flesh crayon, we're maintaining a system that is based on racism. If we are working toward how can we be more inclusive, how can we be more aware, and how can we look at how can a comment have been made. So in that example, whatever comment somebody had made, just stop and say, okay, we're not calling anyone a racist. We are saying, how does that perspective impact someone with brown skin who wants to color a picture of themselves as a child? And the only flesh named crayon in the box is white, peach color, basically.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways to always ask, how would that impact someone? And recognizing impact. And it takes it off the fear of being labeled as something.
So it's really goes back to what you said earlier, is that place of curiosity. Have I considered how this is going to impact someone who this isn't their flesh color?
Right.
Go ahead, Rosalie.
And jumping to, don't call me a racist or something like that, it's another privilege of stopping the conversation.
It happens so often. Are you finding that in your facilitations that people are beginning to be more open to the next phase of this conversation, which doesn't stop it in its tracks?
Yes. With the people that I've been working with, that is the case. Be prepared for defensiveness.
Yeah.
Be prepared, because in the place of feeling like that I'm a bad person or a good person, we are not. And it also depends on the intent of the facilitator, the person who's leading the discussion. If the intent is, we are not here to point out, you said a racist comment, that's racism. What's the intent? What is the intent and the purpose of what we're trying to do? We're trying to build awareness. We're trying to understand impact. And we're trying to see what we need to do to change behaviors and support people that we really haven't had the understanding of what was going on. We had the privilege of not seeing, remember that first slide, not understanding that something is happening. And that's my number one goal in working with people, is it's not about making somebody feel bad. It's about somebody having that aha moment and being willing and wanting to and caring enough to get past the defensiveness. And it's one of those things that, I mean, when I was going out, let me see, that's probably about 12 years ago, when I was starting a deeper journey into understanding racism, I had to look at my ancestral history and look at certain things. And I remember feeling, oh, I'm so ashamed. This is horrible. I can't let anybody know. And I knew, and I know now, that if I stopped there, I would not be where I am today. Yeah. And that's the point. It's having compassion for people who we've left out of the conversation because of their difference. There's also having compassion to ourselves if we have the intent to change. Yeah. And there's some people who don't have the intent to change. Right. There are people who don't want to give up their privilege.
And I had this very conversation.
Fear is the big piece of it.
And the truth is that when we begin to recognize our privilege, there is a reckoning that has to occur. Wait a second. I like it that if I get pulled over as a woman, I might not get a ticket. I mean, that's the truth. I like that.
So like it. And you know what?
And
like it, and
that's what I feel. And if it means the difference between eliminating, contributing to the elimination of systemic racism or me maintaining that privilege, I'm going to choose, okay, equity is better.
Right. And I'll tell you, I had a client one time who got pulled over, and she was probably, I think she's like late 30s, white. She had 2 children. The children weren't in the car, but there was a car seat in the car. She got pulled over, and it was, I think, a routine stop. And the cop said, oh, we're doing license and registration, and she's pulling it out. And he said, oh, you're fine. I trust you. Well, she'd been having conversations with me, and she stopped and she says, why do you trust me? And she really took that risk of doing that. She could have made him angry. But there was episodes, why, you don't know me? Why do you trust me? Yeah.
And that's part of this. What's going to have to happen is the conversations and the awareness.
And they can be had. I can't emphasize enough. Check your intent.
Yeah.
Your intent. If your intent is underneath, I'm going to show you, I'm going to make you wrong and me right, don't even try to have the conversation. But if your intent is this a moment for me to share my experience about, and you can always say, well, have you considered, or when I hear that word or that response, and I think about the impact on someone else, it makes me think da, 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 da. Instead of you this, you that. That's a really good way to shift it to where it's like, well, I'm wondering, or when I hear that, the image I get is such and such.
So just to put an exclamation on what you're saying there, Rosalie, for those of you who are listening later or for who are joining us, Rosalie just gave us a formula for readjusting any conversation to I language as opposed to you language to remove some of the potential for defensiveness. And that's an incredibly valuable tool. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Thank you. And, understanding impact. And the reason I have the slide right here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs is to understand the impact. Think about it. If we want to create an inclusive environment where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, and we want people to reach their fullest potential, let's look at it from this standpoint, because every layer of these hierarchy of needs, if something is off, it will impact the next layer.
Yeah.
If you don't feel secure in your employment, if you don't feel like people respect you, if you are constantly being bombarded with unconscious bias, if you are not being respected or heard or listened to or included, what is it going to do to your confidence? What is it going to do to your ability to be creative, to self-actualize? And this is really, really important, because it goes back to this inclusion's an individual responsibility. We can always look at, what am I doing to help create an inclusive environment? And it all starts inside. And when you think about when we're judging people and people are bombarded with constant it's maybe a default unintentional exclusion because it's natural to hang out with people like us. So, those particular things are really important. But if these things are happening to somebody's world everywhere, but let's just take it within the organization, what is it doing to their humanity? And I'll take it a next level because, like I said, I believe we are caring, compassionate people at our core when we're not caught up in our unconscious bias and our fears and worries. What does it do to our own humanity?
Yeah.
This work is heart matter.
It is. And, looking at, I'm very familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and what have you. And it dawned on me as I'm looking at esteem that I'm in Texas and I've got an extended family and some of whom are racist, and they will never claim that they are because that's not how they see racism. But I'm beginning to understand that there are some of us white folks who actually have our self-esteem wrapped up, and I'm thinking about members of my family, their self-esteem wrapped up in being white. When you have that in an organization, what is HR supposed to do about that when it hangs on tightly to the threads of a culture?
I often talk about we've got to stop looking at it from an either or, a dualistic view.
Thank you. Yep.
It's a both and.
Okay.
So if we're trying to keep someone from hanging on for dear life because no, this is the way I've always believed, this is what I believe, and it's either that or that. If we're doing that, if we can just look at it and say, okay, we're talking about a both and, because there again, it's about building awareness, self-awareness, and other awareness. Emotional intelligence is a huge piece of this, and I'm going to say a little bit more. One thing about emotional intelligence, though, that happens that when we in the organization are considering we're being emotionally intelligent because we're managing our emotions, I want to ask from a privilege standpoint, where are we expecting women, Black and brown people to manage their emotions differently? You always hear, he's assertive, she's aggressive. The angry Black person. We see that a white person being angry is treated and judged differently than a Black person. So to start looking at these places of using our emotional intelligence, seeing, okay, it's not an either or, it's a both and bringing those thoughts to the table and letting somebody share what they're concerned about.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like, and I know you know this because you're a coach, taking it into a coaching conversation of helping draw out what's next and what's next, but bringing someone in the conversation.
That's very helpful. So supporting our employees, for example, and understanding that you don't have to be, you can still appreciate who you are. You can appreciate the color of your skin. You can appreciate how you've been raised. You can appreciate your heritage. You can appreciate. And when we are curious about how other people are impacted by our thoughts, experiences, privileges, we expand who we are.
Right. And I'm going to say, for anyone who, and there are some people who don't care about others and who are not, have any intention of letting go or changing or giving up any power or privilege, that's where HR can say, okay, you can go and believe and do what you want to at home, but when you are within the realms of this organization, whether it's online or, this is zero tolerance here.
Yeah. And you may address
Hopefully
this
we
a
have
little
fewer
bit.
of those.
Yeah, exactly. And you may get to this a little bit later, but I also know that there are some organizations who've had zero tolerance for a long time, and yet it's not really zero tolerance. So if we have time and a little bit, share with us the change that's afoot and what HR and external experts are doing to support organizations from the reality of, yeah, we got zero tolerance into, no, we really do. This is a culture,
Right. Okay.
our values.
So let's hold that one a little bit later, but yes, I'm gonna you bookmark that question, please.
Okay, good deal.
So this is no surprise that privilege is the elephant in the room. It impacts the hiring process, the review process, development, advancement, and there are so many things, and that would be another whole workshop. I do on feedback, reviews, evaluations, understanding the bias in the review process and in the hiring process, all of those things. But this is the starting ground to look at where are these things in impacting, and the whole affinity bias of being picked because somebody's like me, or someone saying I really like them. Okay, what particularly did you like about them? When somebody gets feedback, what specifically was good, and who gets constructive feedback, who gets like, okay, good job, or doesn't meet expectations. Constructive feedback needs to be given, and if we get into the place of it's uncomfortable, I don't like to get it, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, not giving constructive feedback to somebody is like putting them in a boat, sending them down the river and not telling them that a waterfall is there. And, who are you going to choose to give feedback to? And that's a really good place that we can look at. So if I'm a favored person in my organization, and I know people are going to give me good feedback, but what if I'm not? And what if my skin color is different? Or what if my body type is different and people don't know me? What if I'm shy and people don't give it to me? So there's so much we can do that shifts it from being me versus you to, it gets back to that equity thing. What does someone need? It's not equality. It's giving people what they need. So a few more ways privilege can manifest is in our use of language. These are some microaggressions, imbalance of leadership positions, denial of someone's experience. If you ever hear it says, oh, they didn't mean anything, they were just kidding, they're like that with everybody, explaining it away, well, no, I really didn't, blah, blah, blah. All of these things, if we have privilege, we have a tendency to want to do these things. If we're not looking at the impact of saying it, saying that we're colorblind, having a strict reliance on, okay, you must wear certain things to work, or you must always speak English. And there are going to be criteria in every organization. There is criteria and standards for people to meet. They need to be clear. But it's all these other things that is about how we other people that goes back to that place is, are we being inclusive or exclusive? If someone's speaking another language at the lunch table and notice your reaction if you don't speak Spanish or whatever language is being spoken. Check your reactions. If we're having a reaction, right there's probably a judgment going on. There's a big difference between reaction and response. If we have a reaction, that's an emotional reaction. What is the emotion? What is the belief behind it? And once you realize that and say, okay, so I'll use an experience like if I was in the dining room area of an organization, and there are a group of people and they're speaking Spanish, and I don't really know. And I had this actually with some friends of ours who are German, and they're speaking German. And I could feel myself feeling like, I don't feel included. And it's like, okay, instead of focusing on me and thinking they should be different, it was sort of like, how wonderful that they're multilingual. I wish I had spent more time being multilingual. It's such a personal journey of looking at, are we, I can have an effective response to something if I give it thoughtful consideration versus an emotional reaction. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Would you take a moment and explain what you mean here about privilege manifests by being colorblind? What does that mean?
Being colorblind, you will hear, if you haven't read already, say that is a very racist perspective. Often I think the intent behind it was, I don't see color. I see everybody the same. Well, first of all, it's not true. We do see color,
Yeah.
period. And if we don't see color, if I don't see my colleague who is Black, or my colleague who's brown, or my colleague who's Asian or Native American, if I don't see that, I'm not seeing them. I'm not interested in seeing them and their culture and who they are and learning more. And the more important piece is, and a super important piece is, I cannot see how they are being negatively impacted by privilege. And that is a huge thing, because if I only see the same, like everybody's the same, it's all one race, then I can't see where the imbalances are.
That is, I've asked that question several times because in reading and educating, I'm hearing that very conversation that when people say, I see everyone the same, I'm colorblind, and the response to that is, no, you're not. And when you say that, it is offensive. And when you just said, if we all see everyone the same, then we are refusing to see the inequities. That just put a cap on exactly why it is not acceptable to be colorblind if we really want to make a change.
Yeah.
Contribute to change.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful.
Thank you.
Don't see the individual.
Yeah.
One thing I will say too is privilege allows us to ignore, stay silent, and collude with the status quo. So if we don't want to see privilege or address privilege, we've basically said, no, I'm good with the way it is. I don't care. And that's not, most people I work with, that's not who they are.
Yeah.
Really. And I don't believe at our core anybody is. This is important because when we're talking about someone's ability to perform, to have to fit in, being stereotyped, being judged or misjudged, having to put up with, it is an energy leak that equals a performance strain. And so it's a vicious cycle. Not only then are they not able to give their best, you're not getting the best. And then what's that going to do to their opportunity for advancement? So this is where it's so important to go back and look at, definitely, number one, our own unconscious beliefs and biases and position and privilege. Also look at how is this happening in the workplace or the environment? What are the policies and procedures? And really peel and pick these things apart with the idea that it's because what happens if this is happening, then it's still now without the awareness and the work that the organization and the leaders need to do. It's like, well, he or she didn't perform well, so they're not going to be in, but it's a vicious cycle that both are.
So what yours is, if I'm understanding you correctly, part of the business case for paying attention to this is improved performance across the board.
Absolutely. I have it's in my book, a diagram. It's probably on my website too, that says inclusion will drive engagement, and it drives innovation, and then it drives performance. If people feel included and they have a sense of belonging, and they have the opportunity to be heard and be themselves and bring their talents and not have to fit in and not have to be stereotyped and not being judged for being different and not putting up with inappropriate behavior, then if people have that opportunity, then they can excel. But if that is not happening, then we'll just withdraw further and further within ourselves. It's really hard, and it's a revolving door, and they will leave. People will leave.
And are you finding that in those situations, a lot of times people, if it's particular, if there's a culture of tolerance of biases, my suspicion, and certainly from my experience in working with our clients, is those individuals are not necessarily going to go to the culture or even HR and say, oh, by the way, I'm being marginalized. Oh, by the way, I don't feel like I'm fitting in. And we all know people who do speak up are told, shh, you're a snowflake, you're, whatever name we want to apply to people who speak up. So what can organizations do to encourage that conversation? If you are finding that you're feeling biased, racism or marginalization or whatever those terms are, how can they either anonymously or, open door? What is your suggestion there for organizations?
Well, I'm noticing the time, and so
we sure are. And I'm just going to, sorry about that.
No, I just want to keep going, and then maybe some of this is answered.
Yes, please do. Keep me in.
Yeah. So number one, we have to stop and be aware of our thought patterns that keep us from looking at the behaviors that are avoiding looking at the policies, the privileges, and the procedures, and all of those things. We have to look at, as far as privilege is concerned, where are the places that we're saying, oh, but I'm a good person, and I didn't grow up with privilege, and I grew up poor, and all of these things, just to notice all these things. And people could put in the chat if they want to, some of the things that some of the ones I hear is, I didn't grow up with privilege. How can I do anything? I can't believe this is happening in our country right now. Well, that's your privilege because it hadn't been happening to you. Those are the kind of things. I thought we were further along than this. I mean, these are little things that we start to say, well, wait a minute, that's not everybody's reality. And when we are not seeing other people's reality, it's a place for us to stop. And there again, I said, it always has to start with the individual. We have to stop, take a detour, and really look at things. We also have to look at fear. Fear is a huge impact on what we do and what we don't do, and also examining privilege. The way my acronym on this is that we go into fight or flight syndrome. We're defending against something. We're not running away, or we might be withdrawing, which is running away. We're explaining away. We're defending self-esteem. We're defending a position. So ask yourself, what are you afraid of losing? And then we're excluding others based on our own experiences. And then we're avoiding having those conversations, looking deeper into our own beliefs, and avoiding building relationships, all because we're reacting. But if we can note this when you're in fear with awareness, you have the opportunity to transform it and effectively respond. Because we may all be in the same water, and clearly right now we're in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. And I mentioned already about equality and equity. We have to look at equality as everybody gets the same. Equity is giving people what they need. And that's one thing HR organizations, leaders can do to look at our statements of equality. Everybody's going to probably have some sort of a mission statement and, or their core values that talks about equality. Where are we applying equity to the situation? What do people need? If someone is not being included because they are not like me and they're not the go-to person because, oh, I have an affinity with someone else, then they're not going to be getting the same experiences and opportunities. So we need to be looking at that. And it's really important. One thing I ask people to do, and this is another, and maybe this answers a little bit to the question you were having, is when there's a challenge or even in everyday situations, ask these 3 questions. Who else needs to weigh in and be heard? What voices need to be at the table? What else? What perspectives? What experiences are needed? We can only see through our own filters, and sometimes we have blinders. And if we can expand these things and bring the questions into broaden perspectives and experiences and understanding, then we can move to how else. Whose talents, whose actions, whose skills are we missing? There are so many people whose skills are underutilized, or talents people don't even know. And if somebody is not going to come in and say, I don't feel included, because they're not going to come into, even if there's an open door policy, they're not going to say that. What are we doing to make it where they don't want to? I mean, an open door policy is wonderful, but if people aren't coming in with the really hard things, what's the belief or what's the culture that makes it like not safe for someone to do that, to be that vulnerable? Because when we do these questions, and we include people and we bring in perspectives and we start showing that we care about that, we make people feel included, and it makes a big difference. And I am seeing in my work with clients these days that the shift from going to, well, we really don't talk about that at work, to let's have entire discussions, let's have programs, not just programs, but like within their own teams. Let's have 21-day racial justice challenges or those types of things. They're happening. Those were not happening at all in corporate America. So we must own our privilege and determine how our position or power can help others. We have to experience discomfort, this open to receiving feedback. People will give you feedback if you're open to receiving it, but we have to be willing to receive the hard feedback. I don't feel safe here. Okay, why? And look at, what have I done to help create that? What's been my role? How have I been complicit? Listen without defensiveness. Definitely exercise emotional intelligence. Speak up. Examine our own stories and the stories that we say about others. I can't emphasize enough, let go of guilt and shame. Feel it. Feel sad that you didn't know sooner, but don't let it stop the work. And definitely stop denying privilege exists, because in some aspect of everyone's life, they have some position that can have influence. And like I said, even someone who grew up very poor, was discriminated against, and there's an article I just read last week, and the person said when they read Peggy McIntosh's 50 questions, they said there's no way that they can even still feel like they don't have white privilege, because they can still walk in the room and be accepted and not seen differently, but by their race or their gender. So this is so important, and you have the power to empower. We have to identify and interrupt biases and understand the difference between equality and equity. We absolutely must examine policies, procedures, and practices with the lens of equity, because that's huge. You can advocate and sponsor people, be consciously inclusive rather than the default of unintentionally exclusive. We don't mean to. It's human nature to want to gravitate toward people like us. Be effective mentors, provide constructive feedback. If there are unwritten rules, what it takes to succeed in an organization, everybody needs to know them. And that's really, really important. And that happens all the time. And we need to be having conversations. And every organization is going to do it differently. It can be done with small groups, small teams. Find out what works for your organization. It can be done overnight. We have hundreds of years. And
unpack here.
Pardon?
We have hundreds of years to unpack here.
Yes, we do. So I will say use your privilege, and if that word bothers you, your position to influence, to examine and eliminate patterns that disproportionately or differently affect marginalized people. Influence change that can raise people up to their highest potential. And that's not just the leaders. I mean, think about it when you're in an organization, and I know it's different right now because not everybody's inside an organization and everything's virtual, but even virtually, who is it that you could be reaching out to make them feel like you want to get to know them? And there's a lot being said too about not going to Black people and saying, tell me what to do. Don't do that. It's our responsibility to do that. So you don't just turn around to somebody you've never spoken to, but how can you start building relationships? Like I said, it's not an overnight thing. And provide those opportunities for growth and advancement. And I say this too because I also grew up with and have people in my past and my background who don't see things the way I do, that are, I would say, definitely racist and don't want to see it as racism, like you were sharing. I have that as well. But we can, as individuals, try to provide opportunities for growth and advancement. And all we can do is share how it impacts us. And when I hear you say that, it makes me think this, and I wonder how it impacts someone else. You've planted that seed. They're going to do with it what they will.
Very good.
You know, this is true. If we can realize that a rising tide lifts all boats, maybe we can realize, especially within organizations, that maybe if everybody's doing well, the organization is going to even be doing better. So we have to get out of ourselves.
Yeah, beautiful. Rosalie, how can people get a hold of you and share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing inside organizations specific to this conversation?
Okay, this slide has how people can get in touch with me.
Perfect.
On my book page, which is the Conscious Leadership in the Workplace, for people attending this, the coupon code will give a 10% discount.
Great.
It can also be ordered on Amazon differently, but the coupon code is for my website. And I invite people to follow me, to reach out to me and ask questions. I'd be happy to follow up. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is with people in organizations to help build resources so they can have conversations, resources to educate. I'm doing classes. I'm helping have conversations. I'm coaching individuals through their own journey and leadership. I do a lot of coaching around inclusive leadership.
Beautiful. So those of you who are listening, Rosalie's website is RosalieChamberlainConsulting.com. Her book is Conscious Leadership in the Workplace. Is that the title? Did I get that correct?
It is the title. It has a tagline of a guidebook of making a difference one person at a time.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I want to very quickly just share with you guys a little bit about the programs that Rosalie and some of our other D&I experts are putting together. One I mentioned earlier is the Anti-Racism Facilitated Dialogue, which is designed to build awareness, educate, and real-time develop communication skills around tough topics. So if that would be of benefit to you or your organization, or if we can share best practices around that, do reach out to myself, leader at turnkeycoachingsolutions.com. Myself or someone on the team will be in touch around that. And then the other piece that I wanted to share, oh, that's the wrong one, is that our diversity, let me just stop sharing, there we go. The diversity and inclusivity programs that Rosalie does and some of our other D&I experts now has a full component around anti-racism and building a culture that is more than just not racist, but is actively fighting racism. And that's a whole different evolution, I believe, in training and development around this topic. So thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you to our listeners on our podcast. And Rosalie, thank you. Your expertise there's just so many more conversations I'd like to have with you. So I hope we can do this again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Beautiful. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.